Greetings, dear listeners. Imagine a place where every stone, every breath, every sunrise breathes history. A place that has stirred the imagination for centuries, conjuring up images of unbending will and absolute discipline. This is Laconia, the land that gave the world Sparta. But what was the true Sparta behind the veil of legend? Was it merely a stern warrior camp, or did this mask conceal something more? Today we will journey through the millennia to touch reality, not myth, and understand how military culture became the very essence of Spartan society. We will attempt to unravel this mystery, to sense the breath of the past, and perhaps gain something valuable for our present. Our conversation will begin at its very origins, with the founding of a city shrouded in legend. We'll delve into the era of legendary kings and wise lawmakers. And of course, we'll discuss Lycurgus, a figure whose name became synonymous with Spartan order. We'll explore how realistic Spartan notions of equality were, and how they transformed over time. Then we'll turn our gaze to the land itself, Laconia, and its natural features, which undoubtedly left their mark on the character of its inhabitants. We'll learn about those who toiled on this land, the Helots and the Perioeci, and understand how their labor became the foundation for the prosperity, or at least the survival, of Spartan society. Next, we'll delve into the very heart of Spartan life, the educational system known as a goge. We'll follow a child's journey from birth, learning how his first years unfolded, how he gradually transitioned from family to community. We'll discuss the first stages of education, the first lessons of discipline instilled in young minds. Then we'll see how a goge gained momentum in adolescence, when boys left home and entered the barracks, where they faced harsh trials, training in weapons, and the first steps toward becoming warriors. We explore adolescence, a time of in-depth military training, hunting, survival in the wild, and the formation of unbreakable fraternal bonds. And finally, we approach the very threshold of adulthood, the period when young men underwent their final trials, preparing to become full citizens of Sparta. We learn about the daily life of a Spartan, about syssitia, communal meals that were more than just a meal, but a symbol of unity and equality. We touch on the role of women in this harsh world, their important mission in raising future defenders. Of course, we cannot ignore the Spartan army, its formidable phalanx, its tactics and strategy, and the organization of its forces that inspired both admiration and fear in its contemporaries. We will recall the great battles and wars that shaped the ancient world, from the struggle for survival in the Messenian Wars to the peak of its power and the beginning of its decline in the Peloponnesian War. And of course, we will not forget the Battle of Thermopylae, which has become an enduring symbol of self-sacrifice. But history is never static. We will trace the causes of Sparta's decline, its internal contradictions, and the loss of the very military skills and moral principles that once made it great. We will see how external threats and defeats brought an era to an end. And finally, we will discuss Sparta's legacy, how its military culture influenced the course of history, Roman military thought, and how the image of Sparta lives on in culture and art to this day. As we conclude our journey, we will explore what Sparta stands for today, an eternal symbol of discipline, courage, and dedication, and what lessons from its past might be valuable for us, living in a completely different world. Prepare to immerse yourself in a world where every sunrise was a challenge and every sunset a reward for perseverance. We begin our immersion into the world of Sparta, a legend born in Laconia. We'll encounter not only the expectations associated with the image of invincible warriors, but also the reality hidden behind the veil of time. We'll see how military culture became the foundation of Spartan society and try to understand what true Spartans were like. We'll begin with the very foundation of Sparta, its myths and real origins. The history of Sparta, like that of many ancient city-states, is shrouded in legend. According to legend, the city was founded by the descendants of the hero Heracles. The founding of Sparta is associated with legendary kings, whose names were passed down from generation to generation. Among them, Amyclus stands out, credited with founding the first temples and developing the city. However, the key figure whose name is inextricably linked with the formation of the Spartan state is Lycurgus. Lycurgus is not simply a historical figure, but rather a collective image of a legislator whose reforms are believed to have occurred around the 9th or 8th century BC. The exact dates of his life and work remain a subject of debate among historians. But it is Lycurgus who is credited with creating the unique social and political system that made Sparta so distinct from other Greek city-states. Lycurgus's reforms were aimed at achieving several goals: strengthening military power, ensuring stability, and preventing internal strife. He introduced the famous Great Rethra, a code of laws that, according to legend, was approved by the Delphic oracle itself. These laws laid the foundations of the Spartan way of life, which endured for centuries. One of the most persistent myths about Sparta is the myth of strict equality among all citizens. Many imagined that every Spartan was equally rich and equally poor, living the same life. However, the reality was somewhat different. Indeed, Lycurgus sought to limit the accumulation of wealth and luxury. He instituted communal meals, which we will discuss later, and a ban on the trade in gold and silver. All land in Laconia was divided into equal plots and allocated to citizens for use. But even within this system, differences existed. There were three main categories of the population in Laconia: Spartiates, Perioeci, and Helots. The Spartiates, or Gomai, were full citizens and formed the core of the military class. Only they had the right to participate in government and bear arms. The Perioeci, meaning those living around, were free but lacked civil rights. They engaged in crafts, trade, and agriculture, providing the economic base for the polis. The Helots, however, were a special category. Bound to the land, they constituted the main labor force, cultivating the land of the Spartiates. Their status was similar to serfdom. Thus, the idea of equality in Sparta applied primarily to full citizens, to the Spartiates. It meant equality in service to the state, equality in the harsh conditions of life, equality in the face of danger. This equality was not in terms of wealth, but in an equal share of responsibility and discipline. It's important to understand that Lycurgus's reforms, like the founding of Sparta itself,
were the result of a long process, not a single event. The legends about Lycurgus may well conceal real historical processes associated with the consolidation of power, the subjugation of neighboring tribes, and the formation of a unique military machine. Laconia's geographic location also played a significant role in the formation of Spartan society. The region was relatively isolated by mountain ranges, which contributed to the development of a distinct culture and military tradition.
The fertile valleys of the Eurotas River facilitated agriculture, but its effective management required a labor force, which was provided by the Helots. Thus, we see that behind the majestic facade of Spartan military might lay a complex social structure based on the labor of dependent populations and strict citizen discipline. The myth of complete equality gradually transformed into the reality of equal duty and responsibility, which became the cornerstone of the Spartan state. And it was this reality, reinforced by strict laws and upbringing, that forged the warriors we will discuss below. Laconia, the birthplace of Sparta, represents a remarkable combination of natural conditions and human genius, which together created a unique society. The Eurotas River, like a silver thread, flows through a fertile valley surrounded on three sides by majestic mountain ranges. These mountains, especially Taygetos with its impregnable peaks, served as a natural fortress, protecting the Spartans from foreign invasions and fostering the development of their distinctive culture. Laconia's natural resources were generous, but they required labor. The fertile lands allowed for the cultivation of grain, olives, and grapes. However, cultivating these lands and providing food for the growing population required a significant labor force. Herein lies the key to understanding Sparta's social structure, the existence of two main groups of dependent populations, the Helots and the Perioeci. Helots were the most numerous category.
They were not slaves in the traditional sense. Their status was more complex. They were bound to land owned by the state, and they farmed it for the Spartans. They formed the backbone of the Spartan economy, providing food and resources for the citizens. Their lives were hard, full of labor and restrictions, but they were not the personal property of any individual Spartan. Their numbers significantly outnumbered the Spartans themselves, which created constant tension and fear of rebellion. This is why a significant portion of a Spartan's life was devoted to military service. Maintaining order and suppressing potential Helot rebellions was a top priority. The Perioeci, meaning those who live around, constituted another important group. They were free men, but had no civil rights in Sparta. The Perioeci inhabited the towns and villages around Sparta, engaging in crafts, trade, and seafaring. They were skilled artisans, crafting weapons, armor, and other necessary goods. The Perioeci also served in the army, but in separate units, reporting to Spartan commanders. They were an integral part of the economy and defense of Laconia, but their social status was lower than that of full citizens. This system, where the labor of the Helots and the crafts of the Perioeci supported the state, allowed the Spartans to devote themselves entirely to military service and service to the polis. This was the foundation upon which all Spartan life was built.
Laconia's isolation, natural resources, and the presence of a dependent population, all these combined to create unique conditions for the formation of a society where military prowess and discipline became the highest values. Freed from the burden of physical labor or trade, Spartans could focus on honing their martial skills. From birth, their lives were dedicated to a single goal: to become the perfect warrior, ready to defend their city-state at any moment. This path began in infancy, and it was the system of education known as agoge that became the mechanism that forged Spartan warriors. Agoge was more than just a system of education. It was a way of life that began from the first days after birth. It is believed that infants were examined by elders, and if a child was weak or physically handicapped, they could be abandoned on the summit of Mount Taygetos to perish from the cold or wild animals. This practice, although seemingly cruel, was consistent with the general Spartan philosophy: the strongest survive, and society should not waste resources on those who could not contribute to its defense. However, modern historians tend to believe this practice was the exception rather than the rule, and reports of it may have been exaggerated by Sparta's enemies. The first years of a child's life, until about age 6, were spent in the family. The mother played a key role in their upbringing, instilling the first skills of obedience and respect for elders. But even during this early period, a gradual weaning from maternal care began. Children played games that simulated military actions and sang songs glorifying heroes and battles. Teachers, perhaps even at this age, began to instill the basics of discipline and endurance. At the age of 7, boys left their families and moved to barracks, where the harshest stage of agoge began. This was the transition from the comforts of home to the harshness of communal life. Here, they lived in groups under the supervision of older boys and mentors. Physical challenges became the daily norm. They learned to wield weapons, spears, swords, and shields. Their diet was meager, their clothing simple, and their sleeping quarters on hard straw. The goal was to toughen their bodies and spirits, to teach them to endure hardship and pain. Relationships between elders and juniors in the barracks were strictly regulated. The older boys, called arons, were responsible for the younger boys, paidos. They taught them, punished them for misdeeds, and served as role models. This fostered a sense of responsibility and camaraderie. The children learned to work together and rely on each other, because in battle their lives depended on it. As they grew older, from about 14 to 18 years old, their training became even more intense. Young men transitioned to advanced military training. They participated in hunts, which served not only as a source of food, but also as training in wilderness survival skills. They were assigned tasks requiring cunning and agility, a kind of sabotage exercise. A strong brotherhood was formed based on shared trials and devotion to one another. The most difficult and dangerous stage of the agoge occurred between the ages of 18 and 20. This was the time of the cryptia. The cryptia was a unique test of endurance, cruelty, and the ability to survive in extreme conditions. Young men were sent to the countryside, where they had to hide, forage for food, and avoid detection. According to some sources, the Cryptia also included the extermination of helots, which served not only to maintain fear, but also to hone their skills in pursuing and eliminating enemies. This stage was intended to finally forge the character of the future Spartan warrior, preparing him for full citizenship and the highest military valor. After completing the agoge, men attained the status of full citizens, Spartiates. Their daily lives were strictly regulated and subordinated to the interests of the state. One of the most important traditions was the syssitia, common meals. Every Spartiate was obliged to participate in these meals daily, bringing a portion of the food. Syssitia were more than just a meal, but a symbol of unity and equality. At the communal table, affairs of state were discussed, strengthening a sense of brotherhood and mutual responsibility. The diet in the syssitia was simple and meager. The main dish was the famous black stew, a dish of pork, blood, and vinegar, rumored to be so tasteless that even the Spartan kings preferred to eat regular food if they could. Consumption restrictions were part of the Spartan philosophy, designed to strengthen character and avoid luxury that could lead to corruption. The role of women in Spartan society was also unique. Unlike in other Greek city-states, Spartan women enjoyed greater freedom and influence. They did not participate directly in public life, but their primary task was the training of future warriors. Spartan women were physically fit, engaging in gymnastics and other sports to ensure the birth of healthy and strong children. They were proud of their sons going off to war, telling them with shield or on shield, which signified either victory or death in battle. Their strength lay in their ability to raise a generation of warriors devoted to the state. The Spartan army was a formidable force, culminating in the famous phalanx. This infantry formation featured warriors standing shoulder to shoulder, forming a dense shield wall. Each warrior protected himself and his neighbor. Discipline and coordination were key to the phalanx's effectiveness. The armament was simple but reliable. A long spear, dor, a large round shield, aspis, a short sword, xiphos, and a helmet. The army's organization was strictly hierarchical. The basic tactical unit was the locha, consisting of approximately 160 men, commanded by a lokagos. Several locha constituted a chiliarchy, and the entire army was divided into larger units. Every warrior knew his place and role. Spartan strategy focused on defense and delivering a decisive blow, while their tactics utilized the advantages of the phalanx in close combat. Sparta's history is replete with great battles and wars that shaped its fate. One of the longest and most grueling was the Messenian War, a struggle for the fertile lands of Messenia. This war, which lasted, according to various estimates, approximately 20 years, was a struggle for survival and resources, further strengthening the Spartans' military spirit. Sparta's peak power came during the Peloponnesian War, which began in 431 BC. It was a conflict between Sparta and Athens,
the two greatest powers in Greece. Sparta's history is replete with great battles and wars that shaped its fate. One of the longest and most grueling was the Messenian War, a struggle for the fertile lands of Messenia. This war, which lasted, according to various estimates, approximately 20 years, was a struggle for survival and resources, further strengthening the Spartans' military spirit. The peak of Sparta's power came during the Peloponnesian War, which began in 1431 BC. This was a conflict between Sparta and Athens, the two greatest powers in Greece.
But to understand how such a formidable military machine could have emerged, we need to go back to the very beginning, to how Spartan society was built from birth. We'll talk about upbringing from the cradle, about the system that forged warriors. This system is known as agoge. Many have heard of the harshness of Spartan upbringing, and it's often associated with the myth that weak infants were thrown off a cliff. Let's look into this matter, separating fact from fiction. In reality, the decision regarding a newborn's fate was made by a council of elders. If a child was deemed unhealthy or weak, they could be abandoned to their fate in the wilderness. But this wasn't a widespread practice, and certainly not by being thrown off a cliff.
The main goal was to maintain a strong and healthy gene pool, since every Spartan citizen was a potential warrior. A child's first years were spent within the family. The mother played a vital role, instilling the first concepts of discipline and duty. Children grew up in close contact with the traditions and expectations of Spartan society. However, from an early age, a child's life was deeply entwined with the community. The games the children played were more than just entertainment. They were aimed at developing strength, agility, and team spirit. The songs they sang often told stories of heroes, of duty to Sparta, and of courage. Gradually, as they grew older, their ties to their families weakened. This was a necessary step in preparation for what lay ahead.
Agoge began at around 7 years old. This was the age when boys left their parents' home and went to live in the barracks. There they lived in groups under the supervision of older boys and mentors. The first years in the agoge, from approximately 7 to 14 years of age, were a period of intense physical training. The children learned to wield weapons, developed endurance, and learned to endure pain and hardship. Their rations were meager, their clothing simple, and their sleeping quarters harsh. This was done intentionally to accustom them to hardship. The older boys, already experienced warriors, played an important role in the education of the younger ones. They taught them not only military skills, but also the fundamentals of the Spartan way of life, strengthening a sense of camaraderie and mutual support. The next stage of agoge spanned the ages of 14 to 18. During this period, training became even more in-depth. The young men mastered complex military techniques, learning tactics and strategy. Hunting and sabotage missions were an important part of their training. This taught them how to survive in the wild and how to act stealthily and quickly. A strong brotherhood was formed based on shared experience and mutual trust. These years were crucial in shaping their identity as Spartans, as future defenders of the homeland. The period from 18 to 20 years of age marked the peak of agoge, a time of preparation for full citizenship. One of the most severe trials of this period was the Cryptia. This was a kind of sabotage mission, during which young men had to survive for a period of time in the countryside, often in hiding and foraging for food. Sometimes they were tasked with tracking down and even eliminating helots to maintain fear and control over the conquered population. This ordeal hardened them not only physically but also mentally, testing their ruthlessness and endurance. The daily life of a Spartan who had reached adulthood was strictly regulated. Syssitia, common meals, were particularly significant. All full citizens, beginning at a certain age, were required to participate in these meals, which took place daily in communal dining halls. This was more than just a shared meal, but a powerful symbol of unity and equality. Everyone was required to contribute their share of the food, limiting opportunities for luxury, and demonstrating that all citizens were equal before the state. Consumption restrictions were ubiquitous. Luxury and excess were despised. Women's role in Spartan society was unique. While men devoted themselves to military service, women were responsible for raising future warriors. They received physical training and participated in sports to ensure healthy children. Their primary task was to instill in their sons a love for Sparta and a willingness to sacrifice. Although women did not participate directly in political life, they wielded significant influence within the family and society. The Spartan army, as we've already mentioned, was the pinnacle of Spartan society. The phalanx was more than just a battle formation. It embodied the Spartan spirit. Each warrior, standing shoulder to shoulder with his comrade, defended not only himself, but also his comrade. It was a unity based on trust and discipline. The armament was simple but effective. A long spear called a door, a large round shield called an aspis, which protected not only the wielder but also the neighbor to the left, and a short sword called a xiphos. The organization of the army was strictly hierarchical. The basic tactical unit was the locha, consisting of approximately 160 men, commanded by a lokagos. Several locha constituted a chiliarchy, and the entire army was divided into larger units. Sparta's history, as we've already discussed, is full of great battles and wars. The Messenian Wars, the Peloponnesian War, and, of course, the Battle of Thermopylae. Thermopylae is more than just a battle. It's a symbol of self-sacrifice and courage. 300 Spartans, led by King Leonidas, fought against a massive Persian army, knowing death awaited them. They stood firm to the last, demonstrating to the world what a true Spartan was capable of. However, even the most powerful state is not eternal. Sparta's decline was a gradual process caused by a number of factors. Internal contradictions associated with growing inequality, the gradual loss of the very military skills and moral principles that once made Sparta great, as well as external threats and defeats, all led to the weakening of the state. Despite its decline, Sparta's legacy lives on. Its military culture had a profound influence on the development of military thought, not only in ancient times, but also in later times. Spartan discipline, courage, and dedication became a model for many. Sparta, though a thing of the past, remains in culture and art as an enduring symbol of fortitude and devotion. In conclusion, Sparta is more than just a historical state. It is an enduring symbol of discipline, courage, and dedication. And the lessons we can learn from its history are still relevant today. They remind us of the importance of duty, the power of unity, and the true strength lies not only in arms, but also in spirit. Let's begin our journey into the world of ancient Sparta from the very beginning, from the earliest years of the future warriors' lives. The agoge system we'll be discussing began at a very tender age. This unique educational system originating in Laconia was aimed at shaping not just citizens, but ideal Spartans, strong, disciplined, and devoted to their polis. The first stage of agoge spanned the period from birth to age 6. This was a time when a child was still under the care of their mother and family, but was already beginning to feel the influence of community traditions. The Spartans believed that a strong body and a resilient spirit were formed from the earliest years. Therefore, even the games and activities of young children were imbued with a spirit of discipline and preparation for the future. Imagine little Spartans playing not just with dolls or cars, but with simulated battles. Their toys might have been small shields and spears made from branches. The songs their mothers and nannies sang to them weren't lullabies in the modern sense, but rather rhythmic chants that taught children to memorize simple commands and developed their hearing and memory. These songs often told stories of heroes, the exploits of their ancestors, and their duty to Sparta. This was the first, very subtle, yet important introduction to Spartan ideology. Gradual separation from family was part of this process. It wasn't that children were taken away from home immediately, but from an early age they were taught independence. They spent less time alone with their mothers and more time with their peers, under the supervision of elders. This fostered a sense of community and interdependence. The child learned to share, wait their turn, obey common rules. All the things that were so important in Spartan society, where personal interests always came second to the interests of the polis. Regarding the famous Spartan custom of disposing of weak infants, it's important to distinguish between myth and reality. Sources, such as Plutarch, report that infants were examined by elders, and if a child was deemed unhealthy or weak, they could be left to die. However, it's important to understand that these descriptions may be somewhat exaggerated or subject to various interpretations. The Spartans truly valued physical strength and health, but this shouldn't be portrayed as absolute cruelty without compassion. They likely referred to cases where a child was doomed to suffering or would not have been able to become a full member of society, capable of serving Sparta. This aspect certainly reflects the severity of the Spartan worldview, but it shouldn't obscure the whole picture. During this early period, from birth to age 6, the primary goal was to lay the foundation, a foundation of physical endurance, basic discipline, and the understanding that they were part of something greater than just a family. This was the time when a child learned to listen, remember, and follow simple instructions. Games, songs, and early lessons, everything was subordinated to one great goal: to raise the ideal Spartan. It was a slow but steady process that prepared young souls for the trials that lay ahead. Let's continue our journey into the world of ancient Sparta. We've left off at the earliest stage of upbringing, when children learned their first lessons in discipline and the understanding that they are part of a greater whole. Now we move on to the next, no less important stage, which spans the ages of 7 to 14. This is the time when boys leave the comfort of home and are fully immersed in a special system of education known as a Gojay. Imagine that at the age of 7, young Spartans, our little heroes, leave their mothers and go to live in communal barracks. This wasn't an act of cruelty or disdain for family. On the contrary, it was considered a natural step in the preparation of future warriors and citizens. Family, of course, remained important, but now the primary role in education shifted to the state, to the system of a Gojay. In the barracks, the boys found themselves in a completely new environment. Here, they lived in groups, under the supervision of older boys and specially appointed mentors. Life became harsher and more organized. The primary focus was on physical development and military training. Every day was filled with exercises aimed at strengthening the body, developing endurance and agility. They learned to run, jump, wrestle, and toughen up in all weather conditions. Weapons training occupied a special place. Of course, at this age, they hadn't yet picked up real heavy weapons, but the basics of handling them were laid down from a very early age. These could include wooden swords and shields imitating combat equipment. It was important to learn how to hold the weapon correctly, move with it, and understand its weight and balance. Teachers, experienced warriors, passed on their knowledge and skills, instilling in their young students a respect for the art of war. Hierarchy played a huge role in this educational system. Older boys, those who had already completed certain stages of a Gojay, took younger ones under their wing. This wasn't just mentorship, but a kind of brotherhood. The elders were responsible for disciplining the younger ones, teaching them rules of conduct, and helping them master their lessons. They served as role models. The younger ones, in turn, were expected to show respect and obedience to their elders. This fostered a sense of responsibility, the ability to obey, and the ability to lead. Life in the barracks was far from luxurious. Meals were simple and meager. The Spartans believed that excessive comfort and well-being made a person weak. Therefore, boys were taught moderation in all things. They slept on hard mats, often made of reeds, and wore simple clothing. All this served one purpose: to prepare them for the rigors of military service, for life in the field, where there was no room for excess. It's important to note that despite its severity, the Gojay system was not devoid of elements of play and creativity. The songs sung by young Spartans often told stories of heroes, valor, and love for their homeland. This wasn't just entertainment, but part of the educational process aimed at fostering patriotic feelings and a heroic worldview. Through these songs, and through the stories of their elders, the boys absorbed the values of Spartan society. This period, from the ages of 7 to 14, was a time of intense physical and moral conditioning.
It was the foundation on which a Spartan's entire future life was built. They learned to live in a community, to put common interests above personal ones, and to demonstrate fortitude and courage. And although we speak of harsh conditions, it's important to remember that all of this was done with a clear goal in mind: to raise citizens capable of defending their city-state, their homeland. This was the time when the foundations of Spartan identity were laid, the very traits that would later make Sparta so famous and legendary. The period between 14 and 18 in the life of a young Spartan was a time when the foundations laid in early childhood began to take their true form. This was the age of in-depth military training, the time when boys became young men and their training reached a new, more demanding level. The agoge system, already firmly ingrained in their lives, continued to forge their bodies and spirits, bringing them closer to the warrior ideal so central to the Spartan polis. During this period, the emphasis shifted from general physical training and basic weapons handling to more specialized skills. Young men began to master the intricacies of tactics, learning to operate in small units and understanding signals and commands that could be vital in combat. Training became more intense, simulating real combat conditions. It was conducted outdoors, often in conditions simulating field life. Long marches, overnight stays in the open, and movement across rugged terrain. Survival skills occupied a special place in the training. The young men had to learn how to forage for food, find shelter, and navigate unfamiliar terrain. An integral part of this training was hunting and sabotage, which, of course, were not intended to harm civilians, but rather to develop cunning, stealth, and the ability to act undetected. Hunting, for example, was not simply a means of obtaining food, but also training in patience, accuracy, and tracking skills. The young men learned to read animal tracks, understand their habits, and choose the right moment to attack. Hunting, for example, was not simply a means of obtaining food, but also training in patience, accuracy, and tracking skills. This developed observation skills and the ability to act decisively, yet cautiously. The cryptias, which will be discussed later, also began to be established during this period, albeit in a more lenient form. The goal was to teach young men to act in uncertain conditions, make independent decisions, and maintain composure. It's important to understand that all these tests were conducted under the strict supervision of experienced mentors, who ensured that the young men did not cross the line into unnecessary risk or cruelty unrelated to military necessity. During this period of their lives, young Spartans spent even more time away from their families. The barracks became their permanent home, and their fellow students their second family. It was here that close fraternal bonds were formed, which would later become the foundation of Spartan military might. Shared hardships, joint training, and mutual support in trials, all this united them, creating a deep sense of loyalty to one another. They learned to trust their comrades and rely on them in the most difficult situations, which was critical to the effectiveness of the Spartan phalanx, where every warrior was part of a single organism. Games and competitions held between groups of young men also took on a more serious tone. These could include impromptu bouts where young men practiced hand-to-hand combat techniques, or team competitions testing their coordination and endurance.
Older young men who had already gone through these stages often acted as mentors to younger ones, passing on their experience and knowledge. This created a natural hierarchy and promoted the continuity of traditions. Particular attention was paid to discipline and self-control. Young men learned to suppress their emotions and act on orders, even if they didn't seem entirely clear or reasonable. In Spartan society, it was believed that a true warrior must, above all, be obedient, for only then could the entire army be coordinated. The ability to obey was just as important as the ability to command. The diet remained simple and meager, which continued to maintain physical endurance and fitness.
The young men learned to endure hunger and cold without complaining or losing their fighting spirit. Their clothing was as simple as before, offering no unnecessary comfort. All this was aimed at making them as prepared as possible for the conditions in which they would serve. It's important to note that, despite its severity, the agage system was not devoid of elements aimed at developing a sense of self-worth and pride in belonging to Spartan society. The songs they sang became more complex, recounting the exploits of their ancestors, the glory of Sparta, and the duties of citizenship. These songs were not just entertainment, but a powerful educational tool, fostering a strong connection with the past and present of their polis. By the end of this period, around 18 years old, the young men were ready for the next, even more challenging stage of their lives. They had endured numerous trials that had hardened their bodies, strengthened their spirits, and taught them to live in a community and put the interests of their homeland above all else. They had become true Spartans, ready to stand in line and defend their city. This age marked a turning point, when childhood finally gave way to adulthood, filled with duty and responsibility. The period of maturity arrives, when young men who have reached the age of 18 approach the threshold of full citizenship. This is the time when the agoge system prepares them for the final, most crucial trials.
Their physical fitness has reached its peak, and their mental fortitude allows them to grasp complex concepts and tasks. Now they must undergo what historians call cryptia. The cryptia were a special test designed to test not only physical endurance, but also the ability to survive in extreme conditions, and, as some researchers believe, the ability to act decisively and even brutally if duty to Sparta required it. Young Spartans were sent into the countryside, where they were forced to rely only on themselves. They had to forage for food, find shelter, and avoid detection. This was not simply a military exercise, but a kind of training in conditions as close as possible to actual combat, but with an emphasis on stealth and independence.
Historians debate the precise nature of the cryptia. Some believe it was a test of endurance and stealth, requiring young men to live in the forests, hunt, and avoid encounters with helots. Other researchers point to more sinister aspects related to control over the helot population. In any case, the cryptia required the young men to be extremely focused, to make quick decisions, and to be prepared for any challenge. It was a time when they learned to rely on their instincts and on the comrades with whom they underwent this ordeal. Completing the cryptia meant that a young man had successfully passed one of the final hurdles on the path to adulthood. He had proven his readiness to serve Sparta, his ability to survive and function in difficult circumstances.
After this ordeal, usually by the age of 20, young men were considered ready to become full citizens, or sciantes. They were granted the right to participate in syssitia, the communal meals that were the cornerstone of Spartan society, and began their military service, taking their place in the ranks. It's important to understand that this process wasn't random, but carefully planned. The agoge system, from infancy to adulthood, was aimed at creating a united, disciplined, and devoted citizen. Each stage had its own goal, its own methods, and its own trials. And the cryptiae were one of the final touches, forging a true Spartan from a young man, a warrior ready to give his life for his polis.
These 2 years, from 18 to 20, were crucial, a time of final transformation from student to full member of the Spartan community, ready to assume all the responsibilities and rights that came with it. They became part of a larger whole, where personal interests always gave way to the interests of the state. So we have reached the moment when a young Spartan, having passed all the trials of agoge, became a full-fledged citizen. A new chapter of life now opened before him, one in which discipline and service to the polis remained the core. And one of the most striking manifestations of this new stage was participation in the syssitia. Syssitia, or communal meals, were more than just a meal. They were a deeply symbolic ritual that permeated the entire fabric of Spartan society. Every full citizen, beginning at about 20 years of age, was obliged to participate in such meals daily. They took place in special communal dining halls, where members of a single file or community gathered. Imagine these dining halls. Not luxurious halls, but rather simple yet spacious rooms, where men sat at long tables, united by a single cause, the defense and prosperity of Sparta. The syssitia menu was deliberately modest. Simple, nutritious dishes were the foundation. Of course, there was the famous Spartan black soup, melas zomos. This soup, made from pork, blood, vinegar, and salt, wasn't the most sophisticated, but it provided plenty of energy. It was complemented by barley cakes, cheese, olives, and sometimes a little wine. No frills, no delicacies. The goal wasn't gastronomic pleasure, but rather a strengthening of community spirit. These communal meals served as a powerful tool for maintaining equality and unity among citizens. Rich and poor, noble and lesser, everyone sat at the same table, ate the same food, and discussed the same topics. This destroyed any potential class differences that might have arisen in another society. Each citizen contributed to the common pot, a portion of their harvest, their livestock. Thus, syssitia not only strengthened social ties, but also served as an economic mechanism, ensuring that no one went hungry while simultaneously maintaining modest consumption. Consumption restrictions were not accident. The Spartans believed that luxury corrupted and weakened the body and spirit. Therefore, the citizen's life was governed by the principle of moderation. Clothing was simple, homes were modest, and food was nutritious but not exquisite.
All this shaped the Spartan character, which valued strength, endurance, and self-control above material wealth. But the daily life of a Spartan wasn't limited to military exercises and communal meals. Women played an important role in society, although their lives differed from those of men. Spartan women weren't isolated in their homes, as was often the case in other Greek city-states, such as Athens. On the contrary, they enjoyed greater freedom and influence. The primary task of a Spartan woman was to raise future warriors. From the moment a child was born, and sometimes even before, a woman was the central figure in his or her life. She had to be strong, healthy, and resilient to bear children just as strong. Therefore, Spartan women engaged in physical exercise, running, wrestling, and discus throwing. Their bodies were trained to prepare them for motherhood and a life full of hardships. Children remained under the care of their mothers until they were 7 years old. It was she who laid the foundations of their character, taught them their first words, and instilled the first concepts of discipline and respect. But even at this early age, while still under their mother's care, the influence of the community was already felt. Girls, like boys, participated in communal games and chants which prepared them for their future roles in society. When a boy reached 7 years old, his life changed dramatically. He left home and went to the barracks, into the agouge system. But even after that, Spartan women did not lose their connection with their sons. They visited them, brought them food, and provided moral support. It's important to note that Spartan women wielded significant influence in society. They were the guardians of tradition, and their opinions carried weight. They also managed the household while the men were busy with military affairs. Spartan women were known for their pride and devotion to the city. Historians such as Plutarch recount the famous phrases they uttered to their sons heading off to war, such as, "with shield or on shield." This spoke of their understanding of duty and their willingness to sacrifice themselves. However, despite relative freedom, women's role in Sparta was strictly defined: to be mothers and nurturers of the citizens. Their personal ambitions and aspirations gave way to the interests of the state. This was part of the overall Spartan ideology, where individuality was subordinated to the collective. Thus, the daily life of a Spartan was not only rigorous training and battle, it also included deeply rooted social practices, such as the Syssitia, which maintained unity and equality. It also included the special role of women, whose strength and endurance were devoted to procreation and the training of new generations of warriors. All these elements, from the humble meal to maternal guidance, were woven into a single pattern, shaping a unique Spartan society. Sparta's astonishing military might was largely determined by its unique army. Central to this military machine was the phalanx, a formation that became synonymous with Spartan martial prowess. It was not simply a mass of warriors, but a carefully constructed system in which each man knew his place and role. The phalanx was a dense formation of warriors armed with long spears called doria and large round shields called hoplons. These shields were so large that they covered not only the warrior himself, but also the one to his left. This created an impenetrable shield wall, virtually impossible to penetrate. Spartan phalanx tactics were built on discipline, unity, and coordination. Maintaining the integrity of the formation was the primary objective. Warriors moved as a single organism, obeying the commands of their commanders. Spears were thrust forward, forming a deadly palisade. If a warrior in the front rank fell, his place was instantly taken by a warrior from the second rank, thus maintaining the density and force of the attack. The idea was for each warrior to be a support for his comrade, and for no one to be left alone against the enemy.
This mutual dependence, honed by years of training in agoge, made the phalanx incredibly resilient. Military command was strictly hierarchical. A chiliarch commanded a unit called a chiliarchy. This unit numbered about 1,000 warriors. Below him was the lohagag, who commanded a loha, a unit of approximately 128 men. Each lohagag was responsible for the discipline and combat effectiveness of his unit. An even smaller unit was the anloma, consisting of approximately 32 warriors. Finally, within the anloma, there was a small unit called an omotia, consisting of about 16 men, led by an omot. This clear structure allowed for the effective management of large numbers of warriors while maintaining flexibility and responsiveness in battle. The Spartans were skilled not only in close combat, but also in broader strategy. They understood the importance of choosing a battlefield and knew how to use the terrain to their advantage. They often preferred to fight on the plains, where their phalanx could display its full power. However, they were also able to adapt to various conditions. Their discipline allowed them to act cohesively even in difficult situations. The army's organization reflected all of Spartan life: rigor, order, and subordination to the common cause. Every Spartan, upon reaching adulthood, became a full-fledged warrior and member of the army. Their training from childhood was aimed at making them ideal soldiers. They knew their lives belonged to the state and were willing to lay them down for the defense of Sparta. This willingness to sacrifice, reinforced by impeccable tactics and organization, made the Spartan army one of the most formidable forces in the ancient world. Of course, the effectiveness of a phalanx depended not only on its structure, but also on the quality of each warrior. The Spartans trained their entire lives. Their physical fitness was excellent. They were resilient and strong. Their skill with weapons, especially the spear and shield, was honed to perfection. They were trained to work as a team, trusting each other and understanding that success depended on the coordinated actions of each individual. There were also various tactical techniques the Spartans could employ. For example, they could use a closed phalanx, where shields were pressed tightly together, creating an impenetrable wall. Or they could use a more open phalanx for maneuvering. Commanders also played an important role, requiring not only military skill, but also the ability to inspire their warriors. History knows numerous examples of the Spartan phalanx demonstrating its power. Its tactics and organization had a profound influence on the development of military affairs in the ancient world. It became a model for many other armies that attempted to emulate its effectiveness.
The Spartans understood that an army is not simply an instrument of war, but a reflection of an entire society, its values and way of life. And in this sense, their army was truly unique. The Spartan phalanx, a formidable weapon whose might was based on impeccable discipline and a willingness to sacrifice, repeatedly demonstrated its strength on the battlefield. But behind every victory, every display of courage, lay a long history of struggle, a struggle for existence, for land, for ideals. We now turn to the great events that shaped Sparta and determined its fate: the Messenian Wars, the Peloponnesian War, and, of course, the Battle of Thermopylae. The Messenian Wars, which began around the 8th century BC, marked a turning point for Spartan society. These wars were more than mere military clashes, but a genuine struggle for survival and, most importantly, for land. Sparta, located in the fertile Eurotas River Valley, needed resources, and these resources depended largely on the labor of conquered peoples. Messenia, a fertile region adjacent to Laconia, became the target of Spartan expansion. The First Messenian War, which lasted, according to various estimates, approximately 20 years, ended with Spartan victory and the complete subjugation of Messenia. The inhabitants of Messenia were converted into helots, a special class somewhere between slaves and dependent peasants. They were bound to the land, worked it, and gave most of the harvest to the Spartans. However, conquest did not mean complete subjugation. Sometime later, around 690 BC, a rebellion broke out in Messenia. The Second Messenian War proved far more stubborn and bloody. The Spartans encountered fierce resistance, led by such a distinguished general as Aristomenes. This war became a true test of the Spartan military machine. Decades of fighting were required before Sparta was able to finally suppress the rebellion and recapture Messenia. The consequences of these wars were profound. For Sparta, they meant not only territorial expansion and an increase in the number of helots, but also a rethinking of its social and military structure. Fear of another major rebellion and the need to keep the vast number of helots in line led to an even greater militarization of society. It was then, according to many historians, that the Spartan system of education and life as we know it was finally established. Agoge, Syssitia, a complete rejection of luxury and constant readiness for war. The helots became the foundation on which the Spartan economy rested, but also a constant threat that forced the Spartans to remain on guard. Centuries passed, and Sparta reached the apogee of its power. This time was marked by its participation in the Peloponnesian War, which began in 431 BC and lasted nearly 30 years. This war was a clash of two titans of the ancient Greek world: Athens, a maritime power, and Sparta, a land power. The Peloponnesian War was a complex and multifaceted conflict that engulfed virtually the entire Hellenic world. It was caused by a combination of factors: rivalry for influence, economic tensions, and Sparta's fear of Athens's growing power. The war began with the Spartan invasion of Attica, but the Athenian strategist Pericles decided to take refuge behind the long walls connecting the city with the port of Piraeus. The Spartans, skilled in land warfare, were unable to take the city by storm. Meanwhile, the Athenian navy dominated the seas, raiding the coastal territories of the Peloponnese. The tide of the war was fluid, with periods of success for both sides. The Spartans achieved victories on land, but were unable to break Athenian dominance at sea. The Athenians, for their part, suffered from a plague that devastated the city and from political strife. Key figures in this war were the Spartan king Archidamus II and later the general Lysander, as well as Athenian leaders such as Pericles and Alcibiades. The Peloponnesian War, despite Sparta's victory, ultimately exhausted its strength. The war demanded enormous resources, both human and material. The Spartan system, designed to maintain internal order and defend territory, proved less flexible for sustaining long offensive campaigns across vast territories. After defeating Athens, Sparta became the hegemon of Greece, but its power proved short-lived. Internal contradictions over the distribution of power and wealth, as well as the loss of its original strictness in education and way of life, began to erode its strength. It is in the context of this struggle for survival and the defense of one's way of life that an image emerged that became a symbol of self-sacrifice and courage: the Battle of Thermopylae. This battle took place in 480 BC during the Greco-Persian Wars. The Persian king Xerxes invaded Greece with a massive army. The Spartans, along with a small force of allies under the command of King Leonidas, occupied the narrow gorge of Thermopylae to delay the Persian advance. The Persians, with vastly superior forces, attacked the Greek positions. The Thermopylae Gorge offered an ideal defensive position, allowing a small band of warriors to hold off a massive army. The Spartans, renowned for their resilience and military prowess, fought with incredible courage. They knew their task was to buy time for the other Greek cities to prepare for defense. Legend has it that the Spartans fought to the last man. Their fortitude and selflessness became an example for all of Greece. Despite their defeat, this battle had enormous moral significance. It demonstrated that even in the face of overwhelming odds, one can fight with honor and dignity. The name of King Leonidas and his 300 Spartans became a byword for heroic resistance. These three great conflicts, the Messenian Wars, the Peloponnesian War, and the Battle of Thermopylae, left an indelible mark on Sparta's history. The Messenian Wars forged Sparta, shaping its unique social structure and military organization. The Peloponnesian War marked the peak of its power, but also the beginning of its gradual decline. The Battle of Thermopylae forever etched Sparta's name into history as a symbol of unwavering spirit and self-sacrifice. The history of Sparta is not only a history of wars and battles, but also a history of how a society founded on strict principles and discipline strove to preserve its way of life in the face of challenges from the outside world. The history of Sparta, like the history of any great state, could not be a perpetual succession of triumphs. After centuries of dominance and glory, a period arrived when internal cracks and external challenges began to undermine the power of this unique polis. We have reached the 12th chapter of our narrative, where we will examine Sparta's decline, its causes, and its consequences. After its victory in the Peloponnesian War, which ended in 441 BC, Sparta reached the zenith of its influence. It seemed that its military might and strict social system would ensure its dominance for many years to come. However, it was during this period that the internal contradictions that would later play a decisive role in its decline began to emerge. One of the main problems was maintaining the strict discipline and equality that formed the foundation of Spartan society. The ago system, designed to forge impeccable warriors, demanded constant effort and self-restraint. But as Sparta gained wealth from conquests and control over other city-states, these ideals began to erode. Greater inequality emerged among citizens. Those who served in the army and received spoils of war were able to improve their situation, while others who lacked such opportunities found themselves in a worse position. Moreover, Spartan society itself was built on a system in which full citizens, the Spartiates, constituted a minority. The bulk of the population consisted of helots, essentially state slaves, who cultivated the land and provided the economic base. They were also made up of perioeci, free inhabitants of the surrounding territories, who engaged in crafts and trade but lacked political rights. This system required constant military control over the helots to prevent rebellions. However, when the Spartan army was busy on foreign fronts, or when internal problems weakened it, the threat of internal rebellion became real. Another factor contributing to the decline was the loss of the military prowess and moral values that had once made Sparta invincible. After protracted wars and the achievement of hegemony, some Spartiates developed a sense of complacency. The strictness of the agoge may have become less consistent. Historians note that in later periods, Spartan citizens became less disciplined, less prepared for the privations that had been the norm for previous generations. Instead of living by the strict laws of Lycurgus, some began to seek personal gain and luxury, which was incompatible with their own ideals. Economic changes also played a role. The system of communal meals, or syssidia, required every citizen to contribute. But with growing economic inequality, some found it difficult or impossible to maintain this contribution. This undermined the sense of community and unity that was so important to the Spartans. On the foreign front, Sparta also faced new challenges. With Athens weakened, new powers emerged on the Greek political scene. Thebes, for example, became a powerful rival. The Battle of Leuctra in 371 BC dealt Sparta a real blow. The Spartan army, considered invincible, suffered a crushing defeat at the hands of the Theban general Epaminondas. This defeat not only undermined Sparta's military prestige, but also demonstrated that its superiority was not absolute. After Leuctra, Sparta lost a significant portion of its territory and influence. The Thebans, in turn, began to emancipate the Helots and support their quest for independence, further weakening the Spartan economy and social structure. Gradually, Sparta began to lose its unique characteristics. The number of full citizens, or Spartiates, steadily declined. This was due to the fact that maintaining citizenship required owning a certain amount of land and paying dues to the syssitia.
Economic pressure and the loss of land led many Spartiates to lose their status and become hypomaion, people deprived of their rights. Attempts at reform were made, but they were often belated or ineffective. For example, King Agis III, in the early 3rd century BCE, attempted to implement land reform to redistribute land and restore the citizenry. However, his efforts were met with resistance from wealthy citizens, and he was assassinated. Later, King Cleomenes III undertook more radical reforms, including debt cancellation and land redistribution, as well as expanding the rights of the Periaci. He even attempted to revive the agoge system. These reforms enjoyed some success, but Sparta was never able to regain its former power.
Ultimately, Sparta proved unable to adapt to the changing world. Its military machine, once the pinnacle of efficiency, became obsolete. While other city-states developed new tactics and weaponry, Sparta remained committed to its traditional methods. External threats also grew. With the emergence of Macedonia under Philip II and then Alexander the Great, the political map of Greece changed dramatically. The Macedonian kingdom became the dominant power, and even mighty Sparta was unable to resist its military machine. By the end of the 4th century BC, Sparta was no longer a leading power. Its influence was limited, and its internal problems continued to worsen.
Despite its heroic past and the preservation of certain traditions, Sparta gradually declined as a political and military force. It's important to understand that Sparta's decline was not a sudden event. It was a long and gradual process, driven by a combination of internal and external factors. The loss of military skills and moral values, economic inequality, social contradictions, and, ultimately, the emergence of new, more powerful states all contributed to the demise of this legendary city-state. Yet, even in its decline, Sparta remained a symbol of discipline, courage, and a willingness to sacrifice. Although its political influence faded, its legacy lived on, inspiring and captivating subsequent generations. The history of Sparta, with its ups and downs, serves as a powerful reminder that no state, no matter how powerful it may seem, is immune to the changes and challenges of time. Its journey from a legendary warrior city to a shadow of its former glory is a valuable lesson for all students of human history. Sparta's legacy, like the sturdy roots of an ancient olive tree, reaches deep into the soil of history, continuing to nourish and inspire. Even as the city-state's political power waned, its unique military culture left an indelible mark. This mark can be traced not only throughout the Greek world, but far beyond, particularly in the formation of military thought in the Roman Republic and Empire. The Romans, being pragmatists and great learners, carefully studied the experiences of other peoples. They saw Sparta as a model of discipline, fortitude, and devotion to duty. The Spartan ideal of a warrior willing to sacrifice everything for the state was particularly appealing to them.
Although the Roman army never exactly copied the Spartan one, the fundamental principles of the Spartan system of training and troop organization were deeply understood and adapted. The Romans admired the Spartans' ability to maintain a high level of combat effectiveness over centuries. They saw how, despite their small numbers, the Spartans could challenge much larger opponents. This was achieved through a strict system of agoge, which began in early childhood. The Romans, although they had their own systems for training legionaries, adopted the idea of early discipline, physical training, and the formation of strong camaraderie within military units. The Romans placed particular emphasis on the Spartan understanding of duty and honor. Spartans were known for their laconicism, but their actions spoke louder than words. This quality, known as laconicism, became the ideal for Roman soldiers and generals. The Roman army maintained a strict code of conduct that demanded unquestioning obedience, courage in battle, and respect for their comrades. These values largely echoed those of the Spartans. Roman historians such as Livius and Polybius described Spartan military organization and tactics in detail. They noted the effectiveness of the Spartan phalanx, although they recognized its limitations, especially against the more flexible Roman legions. Nevertheless, the very idea of creating a unified, disciplined battle formation, where each soldier knew his place and acted as part of the whole, was very important to the Romans. The Romans also studied the Spartan system of governance and internal order. They observed how the Spartans managed to keep a large Ilotian population in line despite their limited resources. Although the Romans did not resort to measures as radical as the Crypteia, they adopted the idea of the need for strict control and maintaining internal stability to ensure military strength. Sparta's influence on Roman military thought was not a direct copying, but rather a process of profound reflection and adaptation. The Romans took the best ideas and principles that they believed contributed to military strength and the longevity of the state, and integrated them into their own, more complex and multifaceted system. Thus, the Spartan legacy became one of the building blocks of the Roman Empire's military might. But Sparta's legacy extends far beyond the military. It manifested itself in culture and art, becoming a source of inspiration for generations. From its heyday, and especially after its decline, Sparta became a symbol of the ideal warrior, a symbol of unbending will, a symbol of courage in the face of overwhelming odds. In the ancient world, the image of the Spartan was popular in literature and philosophy. Writers and thinkers turned to the Spartan example to illustrate their ideas about virtue, duty, and government. Philosophers such as Plato, while critical of some aspects of Spartan society, recognized its achievements in civic education and maintaining order. The Spartans, known for their reticence, left behind fewer written records than the Athenians. However, their actions, their exploits, and their way of life were captured in the works of others. The Battle of Thermopylae, where 300 Spartans led by King Leonidas fought to the last, became the stuff of legend. This story of self-sacrifice and heroic resistance to the enemy has been retold and interpreted many times. During the Renaissance, when interest in antiquity revived, the image of Sparta once again attracted attention. Artists, writers, and philosophers drew inspiration from Spartan ideals. Sparta became associated with physical beauty, strength, and asceticism. Scenes inspired by Spartan life, emphasizing severity and discipline, are common in the visual arts. In later times, during the formation of nation-states and armies, the image of the Spartan regained its relevance. It was used as a symbol of patriotism, readiness to defend the homeland, and fighting spirit. In literature and film, the image of the Spartan was often idealized, becoming the archetype of the invincible warrior. It's important to understand that the cultural image of Sparta is often more myth than an accurate historical reflection. The real Sparta was a complex society with its own contradictions and problems. However, it was this myth, this legend of a warrior city, of people willing to die for freedom and honor, that proved incredibly enduring. This resilience is explained by the fact that Spartan ideals, discipline, courage, selflessness, and devotion to duty are universal values. They resonate with people across eras and cultures. Sparta, even as a long-vanished city-state, lives on in our collective consciousness as a reminder of what a person is capable of when united by a common goal and willing to overcome self-imposed limitations. Thus, Sparta's legacy is multifaceted. It lies not only in its influence on military thought, but also in its enduring presence in culture and art. Sparta taught us that the strength of a state is determined not only by its size or wealth, but also by the spirit of its citizens, their willingness to sacrifice, and their unwavering discipline. This lesson, learned through the ages, remains relevant to this day, reminding us of the strength of the human spirit and the importance of strong moral principles. Sparta, this ancient city-state located in the fertile valley of the Eurotas River, left an indelible mark on human history. We have traveled a long way in exploring its development, its unique social structure, its rigorous educational system, and, of course, its military might. Today, as we conclude our journey into the world of the Spartans, we can confidently say that Sparta is more than just pages from history books. It is a symbol, the embodiment of certain ideals that, despite the passage of millennia, continue to resonate in our collective consciousness. We've seen how Laconia's harsh natural conditions, fertile lands, and strategic location contributed to the formation of a unique, self-sufficient society. This society, based on a rigid hierarchy where everyone had their place and role, was built around one primary goal: maintaining stability and security. The foundation of this order, as we've learned, were the Helots and Perioeci, whose labor ensured the well-being of full citizens, the Spartiates. The system of education, agoge, presented itself to us as a ruthless yet effective tool for shaping the ideal citizen warrior. From birth, every Spartan endured trials that forged both body and spirit. We spoke of the first years of life, of the gradual weaning from maternal affection, of the games and songs that instilled discipline and love for one's homeland from an early age.
Then, from the age of 7, the life of a young Spartan was completely under the protection of the state. Barracks, physical exercise, training in the use of weapons, a strict hierarchy between seniors and juniors. All this formed not just warriors, but brothers in arms, bound by invisible bonds of loyalty. This system continued into adolescence, when young men mastered more complex military sciences, learned to survive in the wilderness, hunt, and operate in small groups. The Cryptia, this mysterious and severe ordeal for 20-year-olds, became the culmination of their training, a test of their fortitude, endurance, and readiness for any challenge. Only after passing through all these stages did a Spartan become a full-fledged citizen, ready to serve his polis. We also touched on the daily life of the Spartans, their famous syssitia, communal meals that served not only as a source of food, but also as an important element of social cohesion. Consumption restrictions and a simple lifestyle were all part of their philosophy, aimed at strengthening the spirit rather than pursuing material wealth. And of course, we discussed the role of Spartan women, who, while not directly participating in military action, played a key role in raising future warriors, instilling in them the very values that made Sparta great. Sparta's military might, its renowned phalanx, its tactics and strategy allowed it to maintain a dominant position in Greece for centuries. We recalled the great battles and wars that became milestones in its history, the Messenian Wars, the Peloponnesian War, and of course the heroic Battle of Thermopylae, a symbol of self-sacrifice and unwavering will. However, as often happens in history, even the greatest civilizations face difficulties. We have seen how internal conflicts, the gradual loss of former military skills and moral principles, as well as external threats, led to the decline of Sparta. This period reminds us that no society can remain at the peak of its power forever, and that preserving ideals requires constant effort. But even in its decline, Sparta left us a valuable legacy. Its military culture, its discipline, its spirit of self-sacrifice had a significant influence on subsequent generations, including Roman military thought. The image of the Spartan as an invincible warrior, ready to die for his homeland, has become firmly entrenched in world culture, inspiring writers, artists, and thinkers for centuries. Today, as we conclude our research, it's important to emphasize once again that Sparta is more than just a collection of historical facts. It is an enduring symbol of discipline, courage, and dedication. It is a reminder that the true strength of a society lies not in wealth or size, but in the spirit of its citizens, in their willingness to serve a higher purpose, in their unwavering devotion to duty. The lessons we learned from Sparta's history remain relevant today. In a constantly changing world where challenges and difficulties are inevitable, the principles of discipline, perseverance, and a willingness to sacrifice remain fundamental. Sparta taught us that self-improvement, the pursuit of excellence, and dedication to one's ideals are the path to building a strong and resilient society. Let the image of the Spartan as the embodiment of these eternal values remain with us. Let it serve as a reminder of what man is capable of when united by a common goal
and ready to dedicate himself to serving the highest ideals. The history of Sparta is the story of the human spirit, its capacity for great achievements, its striving for order and justice. And now, as our journey into the past draws to a close, let this knowledge, this understanding of Spartan civilization transport you to a world of peace and tranquility. Let the images of ancient warriors, their discipline and fortitude, become a source of peace and confidence.
Let this knowledge, ingrained from the depths of time, help you find inner balance and harmony. Immerse yourself in silence, feeling the peace that comes from understanding the past. Let every breath fill you with peace, and every exhale wash away all worries. The history of Sparta, its lessons and its legacy are now part of your world. Let this part be the source of your inner strength and peace. Sleep soundly, knowing that the eternal values Sparta embodied live on, giving us wisdom and inspiration.